I've told a lot of strange stories on this channel, but today's one might just be the most chillingly unexplainable. What if the deepest bond you share with someone could literally kill you? This isn't just a medical mystery or a supernatural tale, but a heartbreaking testament to a connection so profound, so absolute, it defied every rule of logic and ended in unspeakable tragedy. And no matter what you believe, what happened to Bobby and Betty will leave you utterly speechless. It was a crisp afternoon in September of 1951. Adolphus Eller, a 53-year-old father, carefully carried a large cardboard box from his car, his heart heavy with a mixture of pride and a quiet ache. He was moving his 21-year-old daughters, Bobby and Betty, into a boarding house in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Inside, the girls were already buzzing with excitement, unpacking their belongings. This was it. Their big leap into adulthood. They'd both landed jobs at a cigarette factory, and for the first time, they were truly out on their own. For Bobby and Betty, this was a thrilling adventure. But for Adolphus, it was profoundly bittersweet. He swelled with pride watching his girls embrace their independence, yet a part of him grieved the fleeting nature of their childhood. Still, he found solace in one thing: they had each other. His daughters weren't just close siblings, they were identical twins, and their bond was something truly extraordinary. It went far beyond what most people understood about twin connections, verging on an almost supernatural alignment. They weren't just physically identical, both 5'3" with round faces and dark hair, always styled exactly the same way, but their lives were a mirror image. Similar personalities, shared interests. They both played piano, sang in the glee club, earned good grades. But then there were the things that truly baffled Adolphus. They'd get sick at the same time, with illnesses that weren't contagious. Like the time Bobby developed a painful tooth abscess, and inexplicably, Betty developed the exact same thing on the exact same tooth. It wasn't something she could fake, it was real. They seemed almost determined to be identical in every way. When Bobby needed glasses because of her poor eyesight, Betty, whose vision was perfectly fine, begged and pleaded until she got a pair too. Now this move, working at the same factory, living in the same room, it was just another chapter in their perfectly synchronized lives. Adolphus and his wife had always held a secret hope that their daughters might eventually carve out separate identities, that they would find their own paths. But as Adolphus placed the last box down and saw their identical radiant smiles, he couldn't deny a surge of gratitude. This tandem leap, he thought, felt like a safe intermediary step, a gentle bridge into adulthood. He left a few minutes later, heading back home, confident they would be okay. 2 years later, Adolphus was setting the dining room table back. In Pearl, North Carolina, his wife's cooking scent filling the air. A knock came at the door. His heart leapt. It was the weekend, and his girls always visited. Bobby and Betty. He rushed to open it, his face beaming, but then he froze. It was Bobby, but Betty wasn't there. And Bobby had luggage, and her face, it was clouded with an overwhelming sadness. "Where's Betty?" he asked, a knot forming in his stomach. "Is she in the car?" Bobby shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I hated my job, Dad. I just quit. I'm coming home. Betty, she likes it. She's staying." This was a seismic shift. These girls, who did everything together, even things one might not want to do just to maintain their perfect synchronicity, were now drastically separated. Adolphus tried to process it. "Of course you can stay, honey, but is Betty coming home to visit this weekend?" Again, Bobby shook her head. "No, she's staying there." Adolphus and his wife were stunned. What was happening? But he quickly recovered, ushering Bobby inside. "Come on in, sweetie. Let's get you settled. We'll figure this out." Bobby, however, had no appetite. She took her things upstairs, shut herself in her old bedroom, and didn't come out again. And for the next 2 years, that's largely where she stayed. She became a recluse, rarely leaving her room, almost entirely shut down. She never spoke about why she hated the factory, why she quit. She didn't reconnect with old friends or seek new ones. The once extroverted, vibrant Bobby was now trapped in a desperate isolation. She made no move to find a new job, no new opportunities. It was as if a part of her had simply ceased to function. By the way, if you're as captivated by this bewildering story as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. Trust me, I have so many more unbelievable tales just like this one coming your way. But there were fleeting moments of light. Every time Betty came home for a weekend visit, Bobby would reanimate. It was like a switch flipped. The moment Betty walked through the door, Bobby transformed back into her old, happy, social self. They'd fall into rhythm instantly, as if no time, no distance, no separation had ever existed between them. There was no resentment, no awkwardness. But then Betty would leave to go back to the factory, and Bobby would retreat back into her room, closing the door on the world once more. Adolphus and his wife watched, their hearts breaking. They had always hoped for independence, but Betty seemed okay on her own, thriving even. Bobby was utterly, frighteningly dependent on her sister. It was painfully clear she was falling apart without her. They didn't know how this could possibly play out. Then, 2 years after Bobby came home, something else inexplicable happened. Betty came home one Friday. "I quit the factory too," she announced. "I'm moving back home." In a strange way, Adolphus and his wife felt a wave of relief. This had to be it. Their daughters would surely fall back into sync, find their footing, and perhaps finally both be happy and healthy again. For Bobby's sake, it felt like a miracle. They had seen her radiant joy when Betty visited. Yet a nagging thought persisted. Why would Betty quit? She seemed to like her job, to be doing well. Adolphus couldn't prove it, but he suspected Betty was doing what they always did, sacrificing her own desires to mimic her sister, to bring them back into alignment. But the relief was tragically short-lived. They did fall back in step, but it wasn't the kind of normal the parents had hoped for. Their connection became even more extreme, more suffocating, more terrifyingly absolute than before. They retreated into Bobby's bedroom, now their bedroom, and shut the door. Not for hours or days, but for weeks, then months, then years. They stayed in that room, almost 24/7 they slept in the same bed. They became introverted, together. There was no talk of jobs, no socializing. When they did emerge, they moved with an unsettling synchronicity, walking side by side, shoulders touching, almost like automatons. They couldn't be separated, not even for a moment. If one went to the bathroom, the other followed. Their attachment was a level of enmeshment Adolphus and his wife had never witnessed, an unhealthy codependency that defied description. Their parents were, of course, deeply concerned. They watched, helpless, hoping the girls would eventually level out. But then it got worse. The twins stopped eating. At first, it was just refusal at dinner. Adolphus would knock on the bedroom door, it would open a crack, and both Bobby and Betty's faces would appear, like two halves of a single entity. "Dinner's ready, girls," he'd say. Without even looking at each other, in chilling unison, they would declare, "We're not hungry." And the door would close. Weeks passed. The girls were wasting away, losing an alarming amount of weight. Nothing their parents said or did worked. Logic, pleas, threats. Nothing. It became horrifyingly clear that this wasn't just stubbornness. It was a deeply rooted mental struggle. They took their daughters to a psychiatrist. The diagnosis came swiftly: schizophrenia. A severe chronic brain condition affecting thought, behavior, and interaction with the world. The strange behaviors, the refusal to eat, the extreme codependency could all be explained by this devastating illness. Antipsychotic medication was prescribed with the promise that it would help. Adolphus and his wife made sure the girls took their medication religiously every single day. But the twins didn't get better, they got worse. They spent even more. Time locked away, grew frailer, ate even less. They became profoundly paranoid around anyone who wasn't their twin, even their own parents. It was as if their world had shrunk to encompass only each other, an impenetrable fortress of two. Adolphus quickly realized the medication wasn't enough, or perhaps wasn't working at all. He still believed the schizophrenia diagnosis was correct, but the treatment was failing. He needed to get them more, better help. In early 1961, Bobby and Betty were 30 years old. Adolphus had them both involuntarily committed to a psychiatric hospital. At first, it seemed like a godsend. They gained weight, forced to eat. They were monitored constantly, given proper medication, comprehensively looked after. Crucially, they were allowed to stay in the same room. They had each other. After several weeks, they were deemed healthy enough to be discharged, but the moment they returned home, they regressed. Instantly, back to the bedroom, back to not eating, back to their reclusive, unhealthy state. They were committed again. They got better in the hospital. They were discharged. They got worse at home. This agonizing cycle continued for over a year. Eventually, Adolphus, his wife, and the many doctors and nurses who had treated the twins came to a terrifying realization. Perhaps it was schizophrenia. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was their intense, all-consuming dependency on each other that was causing all their problems. What had seemed like a timeless, beautiful bond was, in fact, a deeply unhealthy enmeshment that prevented them from growing, from becoming independently functioning adults. They were stuck, spiraling downwards, and unless drastic action was taken, they would be lost forever. A decision was made, a decision that would change everything. Without asking the girls, without their consent, they would be forcibly separated. On April 11, 1962, Bobby and Betty were committed to the hospital once more, but this time, for the first time in their lives, they were ripped apart. They were placed in literal opposite ends of the hospital, in totally separate wards. The girls completely lost their minds. They begged, they screamed, they demanded to be together. But the staff stood firm. "It's for your own good," they said, though the words sounded hollow against the girls' desperate cries. Just a few short hours after their traumatic separation, at 1 a.m. on the morning of April 12th, Adolphus was jolted awake by the shrill ring of his telephone. Who would call at this hour? He answered to hear a doctor's voice, frantic, on the other end. The doctor tried to explain what had happened, what disaster had unfolded after the separation. Adolphus, still groggy with sleep, struggled to understand. What was he talking about? Finally, the doctor paused, his voice trembling, and simply stated the unfathomable truth. Adolphus stood there, phone pressed to his ear, utterly frozen. He had no idea how to react. In the days that followed, doctors at the psychiatric hospital, the North Carolina State Board of Investigators, even the FBI, all tried to find a rational, scientific explanation for what happened that night. They couldn't. There was no logic, no medical precedent, no scientific answer. As the story inevitably leaked to the press, circulating through newspapers as an unbelievable mystery, people began to wonder. Maybe the explanation wasn't scientific at all. Just maybe, what happened that night was something humans couldn't possibly understand, but it didn't make it any less real. At 12:55 a.m. on the night Bobby and Betty were separated, a nurse on her regular rounds found Bobby. She was lying in her bed, on her side. She was dead. Just 5 minutes later, at 1 a.m., a doctor went to check on Betty at the other end of the hospital. He found Betty dead in her bed, lying in the exact same position as her sister. There were no obvious signs of what killed them, no illness, no self-harm, no violence, no foul play. They were simply dead. Multiple autopsies were performed, but no medical diagnosis could be made, no reason. They had just suddenly died. Their official cause of death was listed as ill-defined and unknown. The only conclusion anyone could reach was that the Twins had died from no apparent cause at almost the exact same time. The only theory that ever gained any traction came from one of their treating doctors. He believed that the twins were so profoundly distressed by being forcibly separated that they found a way to reunite by willing themselves to die. That the spiritual, physical, emotional need to be with the other was so powerful, so absolute, that they literally forced their bodies to shut down, hoping their spirits could reconnect. But as crazy as that sounds, there's one more chilling detail about their deaths that adds a truly unsettling layer of credibility to the idea that whatever happened here is bigger than science, something paranormal, something supernatural, something else. When Bobby and Betty's bodies were found, just 5 minutes apart on opposite ends of the hospital, they weren't just in the same position. They were lying awkwardly on their beds, not parallel to the bed's length, as most people sleep, but at an angle almost perpendicular. It was an anomaly at first, easily dismissed. But then someone realized, if you mentally removed all the walls between their rooms, between their wards, between their entire separate realities, the way they were positioned made a horrifying, perfect sense. The girls, in their final moments, had arranged themselves to be looking exactly at each other when they died. Their bond was a force beyond comprehension, a connection so deep it defied separation, even in death. It's a story that haunts me, a stark reminder that some mysteries refuse to be confined by our understanding of the world. What do you think really happened to Bobby and Betty? Could a connection truly be so powerful it ends life itself? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I truly want to hear them.